in a way, our event, in the description of the event, there was a huge lie. We discovered it right now. It was supposed to be a round table, but this table is square, as you can see. It's not because of our lack of knowledge of geometry, it's just like we imagined it will be a round table, and reality doesn't matter anyway. So, my name is Vitalie Sprînceană. I'm a sociologist and journalist and sometimes activist, and I'll be moderating this discussion about culture and the role of culture in times of crisis. It's a very complex in many ways. It's a very difficult and also ambitious discussion that could be, like, we could have it in various registers and in various ways. I'll tell you first what this discussion is not about. We will not try to have a philosophical discussion about what culture is, about what a crisis is, and like to throw philosophical definitions. It's of course, it's always useful to, in a way, reflect critically, to interrogate the concepts of culture, the functions of culture, the roles of cultures, or of the concepts of culture that we have, and it's very nice to interrogate them constantly, but that's in a way a theoretical reflection that I would prefer to have it on the page of some journals, or like not here, not because we don't qualify for that, but because I think the purpose is not to exchange philosophical truths, but rather to talk, to share experience, and to try to kind of build here a community of exchanges, thoughts, ideas that will reflect our personal experiences in various contexts in the region. So the discussion will not be about like what is culture, what is crisis, although I invite participants to speak freely their mind, but I'll not pretend now that we're working towards a new definition of culture or a new definition of crisis. So in a way, what's interesting for me to hear, and I'm very egoistic in this aspect, I'm really keen and I'm interested to know what the experiences, the speakers, but you know, and we all agree that this is in a way a conventional distinction, like we want to build a common discussion here, so we would like to hear in a way what are everyone's experiences as cultural activists, cultural managers, cultural workers, independent artists, or like in a way the other ways that you define yourself and you're identifying yourself. So we wanted to kind of bring together what your roles, what your experiences have been. And again, now if we agreed that culture is a very problematic in a way, philosophically, and will not touch it, crisis is also very difficult. Of course, in a way, our brain probably is kind of structured in the way that when we say crisis, what comes to mind is the biggest current crisis. So probably when you read the description of such an event, when you're thinking about crisis, it's like would be probably the war, because this is the biggest thing happening in the region. But before that, there was the COVID pandemic, or not before that, it's happening also, but somehow it moved into the background as if it has never existed. And as it happens, I was like, Facebook is reminding me now constantly about like my so-called memories that I don't want to have, but they're pushing constantly. So it's like reminders from 3 years ago when all this kind of COVID started, and it was really crazy, us trying to figure out how life is possible during the times of pandemic. It turned out that we kind of survived the pandemic. Now we're surviving the pandemic and the war, but also there is before that, if we remember from earlier, there is like the ongoing climate crisis that didn't go anywhere. We could even argue that it got aggravated by the war. Also economic crisis, which is usual in our region. I remember like meeting some people from Western Europe, and like there would be some elections, and you'd have some, as they call it, populist politician coming into power, and they were like, wow, we're in a crisis. And I would say, like, welcome to our world. We're living in kind of crisis for 30 years already, and it's like crisis became normal. We don't know what would be that time when it's not crisis. So crisis is also problematic in many ways. So I would like to, like, you know the speakers, but I would like to introduce them just for those that don't know. We'll be talking today with several cultural activists, managers. Like, you will define, when you will present yourself, you'll choose the term that best describes you. I'm just like throwing these terms just, we have here Rusanda from Artaz from Moldova. You probably know her. She's very active and very famous in narrow circles, as we are all. Are here Tatiana Poshevalova from Belarus, from Belarusian Council for Culture, Tamara Janashia from Georgia, from Kuma, from Cultural Management Lab, and Mykhailo Glybokyi from Izolatia, from Ukraine. We don't have any specific order, but I'll start with Rusanda, since she is the host, and since she didn't want to start first, she asked specifically somebody else to be first. And I'd like Rusanda to share with us, like, in 3, 4, 5 minutes, like, what has been your personal experience as a cultural activist residing also in a village. Like, I would like really to have as much personal details as possible, like how you as a person, you as a leader, or like as part of a cultural organization in a specific context, were dealing with this crisis, with pandemic, climate, economic hardships in villages, also total other context. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vitalie. Hi, everyone. You said that you are sometime activist, and of course I don't believe that activists are only periodically or sometime. So I am a full-time activist, cultural activist, environmental and civic activist, living in Hârtov village. Like, I can say that, and also I am representing not just Artaz, like I am giving to it 10% of my time. I am giving all my time to the Coalition of Independent Cultural Sector as a directress and project coordinator. As an activist, I am responding to, let's say, almost all type of crises that you mentioned. This is environmental crisis. This is, let's say, cultural, never-ending crisis, and to the civic civic crisis also in Moldova. And I am doing this at local level in the village that I am living, mainly environmental activism there and civic one, and then cultural activism is more on national level. Like, if to speak about pandemic, I did what most of the activists did. I tried to, I don't know, to help in a way the local community where I live, to give them some tools and some information about the situation. I tried to organize the community and to be more solidar. I don't know, specific examples to, if somebody is going to Cimișlia, to the city, if they have a place, they could take me, because back then you could go only by taxi. Nobody took you like voting on the street. So it was important for me, first of all, to have an online space for dialogue. So I created this space, I created a Facebook group, and then people were posting the announcements. Also, it was a funny thing, of course, what I did. I was delivering products from our local farmers to city, city friends. So, because farmers couldn't sell their products in the markets, and then we were buying the products and, let's say, selling them to the city friends. And a lot of small things, but I think the most important one was this online place where the people could share their fears, also, let's say, fact-checked information, and also if they had something to give, to help, announcement like if you have anything, if you need something from the pharmacy, we could buy. So this was my input, the greatest one. And on the cultural side, in this year was took place some cultural activities in the village. Beethoven in neighborhood was a series of classical music concerts, open-air concerts with a limited public, because in the villages the public is not so active, so you could have 20 to 50 people, like in open air and safely, let's say. And then also some workshops for kids, open-air workshop for kids. So we created also this physical space for meetings for people, and we are doing this already for 3 years. Because it was Beethoven and Mykhailo, and now in neighborhood, and now it's Art in the Neighborhood project. And this project grew. First edition with Beethoven, we had 3 villages, and last year we had 10 villages, and it was dedicated to facilitate the integration of the refugees in our communities. So we've organized more than 75 activities. Again, workshop for kids and teenagers on painting, sculpture, and many other formats. And also movie screenings, the most popular community dinners where locals and the refugees would meet and cook and eat together, and also create, because it was this also creative part, creating wood toys. And we had 10 villages, and all those 10 villages were hosting refugees. And also when the war started, I did a lot of work on, meeting refugees at the border, finding houses for them and housing them, and doing a lot of work with the community to organize things, food, and just to meet the basic needs of those people. And then the Art in the Neighborhood started. And as coalition and other member of the coalition, they had some activities, some support mechanism, created some support mechanism for Ukrainian artists. There were a Telegram channel also created for that. And then we started to work on our capacity building as coalition and for our members, because we almost all know how the civil society in Moldova responded to the refugee crisis, let's say, and that from 100,000 refugees, 96% were hosted by civil society, and then 4% for the state, and then the state also reacted I cannot say very late, but they reacted late. Yes, this is what I wanted to say, but on just the last thought, that with the coalition we are working on creating or changing the democratic. We are trying to create the democratic mechanisms of money governance of public money governance, and then also a democratic way of governance of public infrastructure, in order to be able to create those safe space, let's say, for people to meet, to have a space for dialogue, to have a space where to build the social cohesion and solidarity. Thanks.
I'm resonating with most of the things that you were saying. I'll have some comments, but later. I would invite now Tamar. And the reason is, it's not just like you were across, but in a way you and Rusanda, I don't know how to put it, you have the privilege to work from home, as I understand. With Mykhailo and Tatiana, it's a little bit different. So I would like you to tell us also to have your personal take on like your personal experience, involvement in culture as you define it. As you saw, like Rusanda was talking about culture, and it's like part of the definition is bringing, like helping farmers selling food to the market, to like really delivering food to refugees and so on and so forth. So it's like the choice of like what you understand as culture is yours. And as crisis, of course.
Yeah. Thank you. So I come from Georgia, and we are always in crisis because this is a drama land. So there is always something happening where we need to get involved, and it is always like life and death situation. And one of the biggest problems connected to the crisis, I would say, during the recent years is the real gap between the state authorities and the people who come from the cultural field. And this gap is somehow growing and growing, leading to different discrepancies in understanding of maybe the strategies that the culture should take for development, or how the people need to be treated, what are their needs, because it's a very, at the moment we have the ministry which is very old-fashioned in its understanding of cultural management, and in some cases doesn't even understand what it is about, because, for example, we have now a lot of recent cases when the really very high-profile professionals are let go from the museums, the ones who are very good at research and acknowledged on the international level, because the ministry doesn't really understand that the museum is not only the storage where you have the paintings, and the people who have experience with making like websites and putting some information on it, they cannot really replace the scientists. So this is one of the biggest issues that we deal at the moment. So the very recent one that happened last week was connected also to the political issues and the political aspiration of Georgia to become part of the European family, as they say, and to get the status of the membership, because there was a very big attempt from the side of the parliament to adopt the law about the foreign agents, which means that most of the people who are working in the field of culture, they would really have problem, because a lot of them, they are not getting any subsidies, any financial support from the ministry, because the ministry also doesn't have any mechanisms how to help these people. And so people who work in the field of culture, they tried to be very proactive also in terms of the protest, because they started to work, the artists started to work with the copywriters for creating some slogans that were used during the demonstrations to make it more creative, also with a lot of humor, somehow to address these really very severe political issues with irony, I would say, but also with quite a serious approach. So this is one of the recent crises, I would say, but there are a lot, of course, and during the COVID it was also very obvious that the state authorities, they don't have any understanding of what to do with these people, because they don't know much how to manage the freelancers because this is also one of the problems. There is no real status of the freelance artists and independent artists. So a group of people, they addressed the ministry with a request to develop some kind of a plan of helping, because many countries, they were issuing aid. It was like a one-way subsidy or whatever. And for example, the European Cultural Foundation, they also created like the solidarity fund where you could apply with different projects, and these kind of things were really very important at that time, but unfortunately our authorities, and especially the minister, were not able to catch up with the situation and somehow to do anything. So I don't know what to say. It's like so many crises. One of them is also connected to the war in Ukraine, because we very much empathize with Ukrainian people, and artists are also trying to do as much as they can. For example, at the very beginning of the war, there was a very good project that was initiated by the private galleries, when all private galleries in Tbilisi, they exhibited the works of Ukrainian artists, and it was really a huge act of solidarity, I should say, because I think these were 13 galleries and really very interesting artists. And these kind of things are happening, but they are mostly like private initiatives on a private level, but still a lot of things, because this has a butterfly effect on us all. And maybe one more thing I need to mention, we have now a very big influx of Ukrainians, Belarusians, Russians, and amongst them a lot of creative people. But unfortunately we have really no idea what they are doing, because they all live in their parallel worlds. And if you don't have any connection on a national level to these people, you somehow don't even know that there are so many events happening in parallel to each other, but they are in a very closed bubble. So this is maybe also one thing that contributes to the crisis of such a discrepancy. We live in the same country, but at the same time we don't know much. But this, I hope that this will change.
It's interesting. Interestingly enough, I'm following the Russian leftist scene, and a lot of it has moved to Tbilisi, and I'm following them, and it appears that they have a very active political life there. But you're saying that they're in a bubble. I'll comment a little bit, but not as just as a point of reflection, because you pointed out to something which is very important, and I'll connect also what Rusanda said. In a way, I would like to bring also to get to our topic from a different angle. We see in a way like two different and contradictory movements in two different directions. On the one hand, as Rusanda and you mentioned, cultural workers, let's put them in general, are taking new roles. So basically community organizing, basically social workers, and
yes, exactly.
Trying to create cohesion, solidarity, organizing communities of refugees, and then creating conditions that the host community adopts it. So in a way, we are taking new roles, and that in a way kind of increases whatever is the concept of culture. On the other hand, there is in a way a crisis, because the state doesn't see. In times of crisis, as you mentioned, the state didn't see cultural actors, like in Moldova also. They didn't exist. It's pandemic, it's war, will take care of somebody else, but not of the cultural actors in any way. So culture is always on the one hand, and in this sense, it is connected directly to our topic of discussion. It's culture is in a way like being asked much more things now to do, like also contributes to social integration, to that and that to that. But on the other hand, it's like the official support in terms of resources, infrastructure is diminishing. So you have to do more things, but in a way on your own. And it's really a contradiction, because on the one hand we're doing more, on the other hand, which this is more that we're doing, but it's being less appreciated by, and it's less recognized as cultural work by authorities. And that's very important, because that official recognition, at least in the Moldovan context, is very important. You have And in a way, sometimes we think that it's a deliberate strategy, like to have this war. And the independent cultural scene in Moldova is struggling, and I'm probably not the best person to say it, like Rusanda will probably better give a testimony to that, but like it's really struggling for recognition that it's culture, and it's really part of the definition of culture. It's whatever else. You're doing activism, you're doing activities, but you're not culture. Culture is something else, it's the highbrow culture and so on and so forth. But let's bring back, let's bring myself back to the discussion.
Yeah, but I had a comment, just a small comment, that during COVID, first of all, coalition was created because of the unrecognition of the independent cultural workers. And also we wrote a petition to the Ministry of Culture to give support to the independent artists, and then the ministry answered that there are no independent artists in this country because all the independent artists are working in state institutions, so they are fine.
We know who are they. We have a list of them.
And I didn't have any data to show to the state secretary and to say, look, we have, but it was like, and I know that they had money to support the independent cultural scene, but they had no data. So all the independent artists are employed to the National Museum.
Sad story, unfortunately very typical to Moldova, which doesn't tell that the traditional culture is really well funded. It's really, they're also struggling. It's just like very few resources allocated for culture and a lot of people struggling for them. And now you have even more people, and basically the ministry being happy to have these two groups or two classes, or I don't know, fighting each other. I'll move now to Tatiana. Your story is a little bit different because of the context, and I'll let you mention about that, like to talk about that, because I don't want to take your voice, so please.
Okay, talking about crisis, I'm from Belarus, as you know, and culture in crisis, for me, it is just natural state for culture. Yes, when there are problematic moments in the life of our countries, in our life, it means that we need culture more, but it has less resources to satisfy us. It's like usual thing. Yes, when we need it the most, they have the least human, financial, and other resources. It's like a law, but at the same time, it's probably the only moment when culture, not as traditional culture, but as art, has chances to express itself. Otherwise, it will just copy and continue to do the same. So we are working. We usually, I myself, I'm not like pure art manager or art person. I came to this culture field from engineering. Yes, being project manager later and so on, and I came to heritage sector first. Heritage sector because there are a lot of people in nuclear, physicians, you see a lot of things. Just because they came to this rather complicated field from different other fields, which because its field is cross-sectoral, yes. Both activism and restoration and construction works and work with memory and a lot of things, and philosophical, everything. Yes, that is why it is a rather complex field, and my way to culture was through this heritage field, and then later to some others as well. And I find myself as being kind of a culture manager in terms that I can connect different people and different entities and different fields into some new conglomerations, yes, and this is the source of any innovation, inspiration, and so on. I connect people with creative ideas, with managers or producers, connect organizations with different background in partnership, and then they can produce something new. It's my gift on my maybe like goal and what I can do well. And that is why I appeared in this field between different people, activists, culture workers, education field, intellectuals, Belarusian intellectuals, and a lot of other things. And working with culture, we worked with, it its promotion in Flying University with creating specific communities like where those who started in Belarus Aspen seminars, where all those issues are to inspire. Finally, there is a performance, but performance is inspired by philosophical discussions during 1 week between different champions in their fields. Yes, and so it's like that. So I'm working in such a rather interesting field, and we're also making a lot of culture policy work and monitoring of UNESCO Convention of Freedom of Cultural Expression of 2005. That is why we know the field well, but not like actors, but mostly like person in between. And we continued all these things during recent crises. And of course, COVID crisis, and then this crisis, recent crisis of problem, a hell, not a crisis. Crisis is something you have a hope at least. But in a hell which we appeared as Belarus after 2020. And this 2020 was a starting point for Belarusian Council for Culture, which was kind of our art project as well. And why? Why I came to Belarusian Council for Culture as this facilitator for development, like remaining in my own organization, but coming there. 2020, I observed this from Lithuania, living there at that moment already, and just made a couple of visits to Belarus to feel the spirit of this revolution. And this revolution, this uprisal, has very interesting nature to my mind. It was a kind of general, common, joint culture expression of the whole nation. It was not fight. When they asked, oh, why it is not Maidan, why it's no weapon, why no shooting? You see, it was not even uprisal in the traditional sense of this word. It was really like a reaction to this stagnation, into this real crisis, previous model of the state, of this society. Like this common art project of a lot of people who suddenly came to the streets, creating all together this artistic reality, which they imagined together, expressed with these posters, music, on the streets, everything. And all people were creating one big performance. And that is why they were so united and so inspired all together. Yes, and they had no mind even that it is kind of violence or something like that, and that they will be punished for this so strongly. I think nobody of them expected this. Me, as a very old experienced activist from 90s, I knew what will happen later. And we were thinking just at that time how will help these people to survive and to overcome depression and to come to the life of artistic life and just ordinary life again after this. But it was really common art expression of burying the Belarusian nation, contemporary nation, from the point of view of future, not traditional, not continuing talking about some traditions or heritage or something like that, but reflecting on this common imagination of the future. And they brought this to the streets. We are these people. We would like to have this posters, these songs, and these messages to authorities and to each other. Yes, and it was like really culture art expression. Yes, that is why it was so strong, and this is why it is on one hand followed by these reflections which we have now, and these reflections after this therapeutic stage will probably produce a lot of other expressions based on them. And on the other hand, it caused such tough reaction of authorities. Yes, it was fear of regime that couldn't understand that kind of protest and that kind of expression, because it is not violent, it is not fight, but it is a vision of the world which they cannot understand, accept, and even cannot see. It is painful for them to see that they are the old in the past and already dead, and this is life. Yes, and now this dead try to make dead others. It is their main goal. That is why among political prisoners in Belarus, 1/3 are culture actors. 1/3, and others more or less connected to culture. And they are the first to go to prison, the first to be killed, the first to be in prison for 20 years. It's absolutely for poster, for, I don't know, for nothing, yes? Because they are really enemy. Those expression is enemy, yes? And this is, for me, it's just how to distinguish culture, which is translation of norms, and art, piece of art, which change everything and create new vision of the future for the whole nation. That is why it was art. And for me, it is very important to find when it happened, yes, how to work with this and how to perceive this. Because if we perceive this right way, we'll use this for the future as well. It will be action, not just expression, but action. So it's like about the role of culture as something which can change the world in the times of crisis to this or that side. Yes, and to help people to make choice to this or this side.
We'll come back to this because it's a topic that I'm also working on. This power of culture, not only to criticize the present, but also to imagine an escape, or not an escape, but surpassing the present, a way to get out of the present, to imagine futures. And I think that's a very, very powerful force of culture that we should also be aware of. I was thinking about almost the equivalency that you made, or you're saying that the Belarusian authorities are making, like artist equals enemy, and in a way that also kind of can describe a little bit our situation, in the sense, not enemy in the sense of like putting the Belarusian case, I would argue it's a little bit extreme for Moldova, but enemy in the sense a person that is unhappy, criticizing, very rarely praising the status quo, always saying yes, 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 but there is another better possible world, or in a way. So I'll keep that in mind. Thank you for this. Might be used this for the poster and the statistics also, because it's very powerful statistics. And in a way, I'm a sociologist by training, and numbers tell you different stories if you read them in this way, for example. Yeah, Mykhailo, you are probably, I don't know how to put it, last to speak, but not the least. It's just like, in a way, Ukraine was mentioned by almost everyone, directly or indirectly. So how you, as a cultural worker from Ukraine living outside Ukraine, and how was for you the last crisis, the COVID crisis and other crises? Because again, as I said, we're probably discussing the war, and maybe that would be kind of fair to, if you're comfortable, to kind of narrow it down, because it's a different situation. COVID was one thing, and I remember, to be honest, I remember like not being sure if I'll survive it, at least in the beginning. I was under the impression, reading about the Spanish flu in the 20s and the huge waves of deaths that it made, and I was under the impression that in a way it would be something similar, and it would be a lottery, and I'm happy in a way for myself that I survived. There are many people that have not survived. It was maybe not as grave but that was a different crisis, and now confronted with this war, somehow my brain has forgotten almost the previous crisis, and it's focused on this one, and I'm thinking it like really very, I'm seeing it in dramatic colors and so on and so on. Please have the floor.
Yeah, so I work in an organization that is called Izoliația, and Izoliația is a cultural foundation that has been established in Donetsk, in the east of Ukraine, in 2010. And since 2010, we went through 3 major crises on the verge of survival. And basically the whole life of our organization is somehow built around this. So we were established in Donetsk with the idea to replace old industry, old factories that were shut down and not working, create new economical reality with new creative industries, new jobs for people working in service areas, but also to build a new future, new vision for the region, because as an old industrial region, it was for a long time based on old Soviet ideology. On main square of Donetsk there is a big monument of Lenin, and there is a quote saying that without Donbass, communism would be merely a good wish. And it was also really funny, but it was stuff that people really were attached to, and how they build their identity. We are miners, workers on different sort of factories, metal workers, chemical workers, and people haven't imagined themselves working somewhere else or living other lives. I'm always talking about this system that was built in Donetsk. Well, actually, it was built in Mariupol. There was a system organized by city government. The children in school would go through orientation to understand that, how they want to work on two big metal factories in Mariupol, and then they will go to university according to this orientation, and then the job was waiting for them. So everyone was really happy, like I have a job already, and it's cool, but everything's decided.
I am fine, but I have a job.
Yeah, but I mean, it's in a ninth grade, and I already know where I will go. And it was really powerful, especially for people who survived the 90s, where there was no job, and it was really great for them. But for us, it was quite dim, and we wanted to build something else. So we wanted to have more interesting future with more opportunities. There is a film shot by Alexander Rati. It's called Returns, and there is this quote that I was talking about quite a lot. He said that I was born in Avdiivka, and there are two factories in the city, so I had a choice in my life, where to go. And this was the reality that I wanted to change. But in 2014, a Russian invasion started. They took over our city, they took over our space. And Izolyatsiya, a big cultural center, like it was a huge space. It, in a way, it was kind of Disneyland of arts and culture. You could come there and spend the whole day. There was a number of different exhibition spaces, library, cinema, canteen, a lot of stuff to do. And it was thing number 2 that occupants took over. So they took over the city government, regional government, and then they came to us. Since then, and right now as we are sitting here, our cultural center is used as illegal prison. Illegal means that it's not recognized by legal system of Russia. So you cannot, write petition or ask if someone is there. There is no any procedures, and it's basically closed, and you won't even know if someone is captured there. We been talking to a lot of people who were either released or exchanged or managed to escape. There is a website we did with these stories, and Stanislav Aseyev, one of the most famous prisoner, he wrote a book about it. It's now translated in various languages. It's like translated in English, French, German, Swedish, Dutch, and it's really interesting. But he spent 2 years in prison, and he described his experiences and what he saw. People being tortured, people getting mad there. And as we sit here, it is still working, despite all everything that we were trying to achieve. We were trying to push foreign governments to push Russia to at least recognize and to make it legal prison, to allow Red Cross to see it, to allow OSCE to come to see it, but no international missions were allowed to go there. So it's a huge story, unfortunately, and it's like this. So we moved to Kiev, and we started to work from there, and we built a new cultural center there. It's called Azon. It's on the territory of a shipyard, so it's another industrial privatization process, which was quite successful with lots of programs and exhibitions and everything until COVID came to us. And because it was a huge place based on human interaction, events, concerts, everything, we couldn't keep on using it anymore. We paid rent, and we owned a huge number of money, so we had to close it for a year, basically, during COVID. And this is when we started to work with decentralization. Now, this is a really interesting thing, that in Ukraine, thanks to big reform done to do financial, political decentralization, a lot of power came to smaller towns, smaller communities, and a lot of money stayed in their own budgets. So we started to build capacity of these organizations, helping them to understand what they can do. We had a lot of new departments of culture who were genuinely interested in doing something else. We worked in one of the main cities that we worked was Solidar. It's a city built around salt mines, and I read this strategy of Solidar Department of Culture is awful. Like preservation of traditional dances. That's really, really boring. But we met people who were really interested in making it modern, making use of it for their communities, and it was amazing. So we moved to Solidar, we changed our registration, we opened a new office, we did a big residency program, big research program in Solidar. It was really great. And now I think most of the people know that Solidar is basically wiped out from the earth by Russian artillery. There is no houses left. Our office is destroyed. But the sculpture made by Anton Logov, Ukrainian sculptor, artist, and he's doing different stuff. With the sculpture that he did together with local community, people who came to help him to produce it, it still stands. So it's we found this picture which is amazing. There is this really bright yellow wooden sculpture standing in front of destroyed houses, and the sculpture is still there, which is amazing. So yeah, Solidar does not exist in a way anymore, and it's on occupied territories right now. So we are trying to do whatever we can at these situations, which is supporting Ukrainian people by providing humanitarian aid. The big project that we were supposed to do last year with money from European Union, we managed to renegotiate into humanitarian aid program, which was €1 million that we still giving to communities that are accepting internally displaced people. We are building shelters, we are building places where people are finding a place to stay. It's a big program, and we hope to continue it this year with new funding. But at the same time, of course, as a cultural organization, we felt the need to support artists and cultural players. So we issued 56 grants to different organizations. We had a separate program that supported cultural professionals, and this was actually really interesting because we had an open call. It's a really small money, but we had money coming from one of the donors that they said, you do whatever you want, we don't need any reports, it's just for you. And we thought, okay, we should give it to people. And we made an open call. And we thought that, okay, there will be some artists, curators, like researchers. And instead we received a huge number of applications coming from, library workers, cleaners from musical schools, people who had at least minimal connection to culture, but they were in a horrible situation right now because these places are not working, they are displaced, they don't have money. So we did this support twice. It was small money, but I think it was really helpful for these people. At least this is what they wrote in their applications, and this is how we selected people. So it's a really important part of our work, and again, I really do hope that we will continue this. But of course, another part of this work is cultural diplomacy. Yeah. Because again, who speaks about Ukrainian culture, about situation in Ukraine better than artists? And when invasion started, I just spent the first day on the phone, talking to different media, talking to foreign media, like BBC, I call this, international outlets who needed a voice coming from cultural organizations is not affiliated with the state, which is not affiliated with the business, which has some understanding of how society works. And of course, since then we are supporting a lot of different projects, organizing different ways to represent Ukrainian culture abroad and support Ukrainian actors who want to have this representation. Well, to be honest, I can of course talk endlessly about this, because this year we've been doing everything we could, but yeah, it's probably better to stop at some point. Well, one thing I wanted to also say is that Ukrainian government and authority system is quite weak, and this gives cultural organization and NGOs, and most of the NGOs, no matter what they do, they somehow still considered to be cultural players. It gives a lot of freedom and a lot of opportunities of what they can do. So a lot of roles that are traditionally taken, well, I mean, it's everywhere. In our region, it's everywhere. It's not only in Ukraine, but it's a thing that usually done by governments in Western Europe, let's say in Western world, is taken over by these NGOs and individual activists, which is, in one hand, is great for us, but on the other hand, sometimes, of course, you would want that government will take care about this and you will do something more pleasant and nice.
Yeah, like doing everything seems a good way to draw a conclusion to this kind of first round, let's put this, of this square table. I have several topics that I wanted to tackle, but I'll just mention two of them. I'll throw them to the audience maybe for reflection, and also if there will be questions later. One is like, and I think you also briefly touched everyone, directly or indirectly, there is this question of how to put it, cultural work as work and cultural worker as a worker. We were really like, most of us are in a very precarious situation, struggling for recognition. Our work is not very much recognized as such. Like if I'll ask you what contracts do you have, or what like how do you think in 30, 40 years when we will retire, how everyone is imagining their own future, that would be probably a sad discussion. It reflects in a way a situation, and that's also very kind of important part of the discussion. Unfortunately, we will not tackle it, but it was mentioned, and I felt the need to bring it. The other thing we also briefly touched directly or indirectly is this, and it's another paradox in a way. If I remember, I was too young to be politically active and mature and in understanding everything, but I remember there was a lot of discussions in this cultural field in the 90s, at the beginning of the 90s, at the moment of the collapse of the Soviet Union, about like how art was so politicized and it needs to take a distance from politics. It needs to be like, we have to rediscover art for art and all this kind of stuff that we don't need somebody to tell us like what is the correctness of like politically appropriate form, language, whatever. But in a way, everybody now is saying that we were basically doing political work also, or things that are very relevant politically. In a way, we understand that in a totally different way, what we do as cultural workers is really relevant politically. That sometimes might bring people in jail, sometimes like might maybe changing sometimes. Although I'm very ambiguous about NGOs taking the roles of the state, because NGOs depend on funding and it's irregular, and I would like to have a stronger state that does its functions, and then we do less what is social work. Probably in some, there is a hardcore part of it that should be done by the state and not by us, and so on and so forth. But that's another topic for discussion. And in a way, even before the war, our region is in a very politically, is in a very kind of deep and very extended crisis. I sometimes say that we are in an unfinished perestroika, like in a way where in living in authoritarian context, each authoritarianism in the region has its own taste. Sometimes you have oligarchs, sometimes like in Belarus, you have like old style nomenclatura or old style like apparatchiks, but still you have, democracy is still kind of to be desired yet in our region. And that's the other crisis that is ongoing, and it in a way defines, prescribes some of the roles, some limits, and so on and so forth. But since war and peace was really the big topics, I'd like to move to this, and I know it will sound pretentious, but how do you see the role of culture in the peace and in the war, in this context, in our context, and also connecting, because for me it's very important, and I was working on this topic. I call it Moldofuturism, and it's basically a made-up concept I took from, there is this cultural trend or cultural philosophical thinking called Afrofuturism, and it's basically black communities everywhere imagining a future, and it's their ambition to imagine a future that is theirs. It's not somebody else imagining our future. And to give you an example, you have Silicon Valley constantly telling you like what will be the future. Like this, we invent this technology that will change the future. And you have communities saying, no, no, no. Like let us define what is our future. Let's imagine it. At least do this work of imagination. It's a very potential act, and I think like culture can say that like the future is not prescribed, is not decided yet, and it's something to be negotiated and to be imagined. And connected to that, like I would like to ask two connected questions. One, culture in war and in peace, and also if you can, do you think through our culture, through our cultural activities, do we know, can we already think, or is there any chance that we could think of a post-war world in our region and how this would look like? And maybe you know already artists that even in this moment when the war seems not to end, maybe they're seeing like ways, because let's face it, at one point this war will end, and it should end. We hope it will end very soon. But do we know how that world after the war will look like? So it's free, like whoever feels that, and we can also open the audience to the audience if.
I don't know. I can continue to be the first, and I don't know. For me, first of all, the role of the culture has an, let's say, educational role. But when we are speaking about education, it's not about this formal education, but informal education, and it's more about broadening our vision about the world, that it's a diverse world where we should learn how to coexist, and it's about critical thinking, of course, and we are trying to do this in our communities. And I was participating today in a discussion with different cultural workers from a very good friend of our organizations. And a woman from Ukraine said, I don't know, Mykhailo, maybe you will correct me, that in Ukraine culture is perceived as like it's important for the security of the country. And now they have a program for promoting the reading, lectura, citirea, the reading for the society to read more, because also the reading is important for security of the country. So I never thought of this level, that culture is really contributing to have this I don't know, security, that there will be no war, or if there will be a war, the society will be solidar and they will react somehow together. They will know that they are on the same path, and then the level of survival it's much higher. Yes, and then the role of culture is to give space for reflection on relevant topics for the contemporary society. And also I mentioned several times that also it's important to have this public spaces or public infrastructure for meetings and reflections on the contemporary problems that we have. And then again, social cohesion and solidarity is again one of the most important roles of the culture.
Okay, continue. I'm just thinking about this. First of all, there is culture, which is a reason why there is war or peace at the moment.
There is what?
It's a reason why the Bucha and Irpin happened because of something was wrong with culture, both in Russia and in Europe. Something was wrong, something was not reflected, something was not expressed, or expressed and reflected wrong way. Yes, if such things happened during this year in Ukraine are possible after Auschwitz, after the Second World War, after all those things we witnesses in Asian countries, yes, after Pol Pot and everything reflected.
After Srebrenica.
Yes, after Srebrenica, just at the end of it. If it's still possible, something wrong with culture. Something was not done or done the wrong way. Because if we go a little bit deeper into history and read recent Russian books and watch some films, yes, we understand why it happened. Exactly. And those people made input into this. People who produced films and read books made input into what happened there. It's their fault. But not only their fault, but also fault of those people in peaceful countries and rich countries who let this happen and supported this. Supported, consumed these products, yes, didn't question them, yes, and considered to be this culture great and the only one to be disseminated, yes. You see, there is a real fault of the culture and failure of the culture. That's one point. Another point is about this imagined future. It's one point is to imagine it, another thing is to promote and defend it, to let it happen, yes. And to let it happen, we can come back that war is not only war by weapons on the field, it's a culture war. There we are in the situation of culture wars. This culture wars doesn't mean that people should fight to beat each other, yes, but they should impose their thinking, their vision of the world, and defend it. Defend it, yes, listen, if our vision of the world is inclusive, we'll also listen to others and create space for different views and so on. But we should defend this value and this norm of different world, of inclusion for different people and different views, yes. If there is another culture in this war, another side, which totalitarian, which think, oh, only this one and nothing, everything else is wrong, yes, we have to fight it, yes. We cannot be inclusive to such kind of view because it's absolutely antagonistic to ours. And we should just accept this. Accept this and not to be so politically correct, not to be blind to such things, yes? And to be clear, to defend our values, or evaluate our values, to rethink our values, yes? And if we think, okay, this is important for us, try to fight for this, try to promote this, try to let it happen, yes? And this is the role of culture, to make a choice, finally. Arts for arts is good when nothing to do, yes? And you have no, why not? In this case, let's not violate ourselves, yes? But if we have a lot of things to do, let's do.
Yeah, I forgot to say about my vision about the future. And I am dreaming about a future where the world stops to grow economically and like really stop to over-consume all the resources that we have. And that capitalism will die at one point. Like I really wish this, and it's like it's a fact that we will maybe not have this comfort that we have now, and like we don't need to grow endlessly, because if we will grow, we will, how to say, explode. So this
we don't need 15 phones, we need one. That will work for a long time. Tatiana made a point which is a very provocative statement, and I would invite you later to comment, everyone. Like, this war also is a failure of culture, and I would partially agree with her on a very, how to put it, philosophical level, because when this war started, and personally I'm an anarchist and activist, and I'm a pacifist. I'm really almost absolute pacifist, and I was struggling, to explain my position to a lot of people. And I remember just looking through the textbooks, just take any textbook, historical textbook of history, and if you skim through it, just divide the chapters into chapters that talk about wars and chapters that talk about peace. You'll have at most 2 or 3 heroes that are somehow related to peace. It would be Leo Tolstoy, it will be Martin Luther King, and maybe Mahatma Gandhi. It depends on if India is considered the largest population, the largest country by population is considered to be relevant for that textbook or not. But mostly those 3, and for all of them is like a short passage. Everything else, it's propaganda of the war. We know more about, we have a medieval ruler here, Stefan cel Mare. We know better the name of his horses and whatever, and the many wars, and we praise the many wars that he conducted, and there is no culture of peace in our culture. And I would agree with you on this level that as long as we accept that violence, and also in sociology, violence means a lot of things, and it's like war is just the extreme form of violence, because we as artists, and everyone probably is aware of and everyone is in a way participating in various struggles. Like here we are participating in struggles for gender equality, and that's also a form of violence. We're participating in movements for social justice, and economic inequalities is also a form of violence. It's not war because it's not weapons, but it's also a form of violence. So in a way, as long as we accept, and that would be also my provocative thesis, as long as we accept for violence as legitimate, then you'll end up people using it. I don't know what is the opposite of it, because my real life experience in communities or in settings where people live by consensus, that takes a lot of time, and nothing in our life is ready to accommodate it. That process through which you reach decisions by consensus, 3 days for just to reach a decision from a point and then to another point. So, but I'll give the floor to Mykhailo or to Tamara.
Well, I just want to say that in Ukrainian, the modern cultural narrative, I think most of the heroes are people coming from culture, because if you look at the history, you would have a couple of warlords, like Bogdan Khmelnytsky, for example. But then Ukraine was absorbed by Russia, and all the fights, all the resistance were done through culture, through preservation of traditions, language, theater, literature, and all the people we are talking about now, most of them are participated in cultural resistance. Even Mazepa, who is also used to be participating in wars, but he was also a big investor into culture, into rebuilding churches, supporting artists, and so on. So it was a big part of Ukrainian culture from the very beginning, and still is. So yeah, it's also interesting to compare, because things that you are talking about are mostly, I think, written in Soviet narratives. This myth of Second World War and all this heroes, war heroes and people. These narratives are usually brought to us through Russian colonialism, and this is something that I think we should clearly try to remove from our consciousness and from things that people see every day in global narratives of our countries.
I wanted to jump in on this colonialism thinking, and that's another direction on how can we imagine a future without colonies, or which is not colonized, or a decolonial, or decolonial describes the process, a decolonized future, and that's a very interesting also topic. Tamara?
Yeah, I think in order to understand how to decolonial something, first people need to understand that they were colonized, because in most of our post-Soviet countries this is not really the case, because sometimes people really glorify the whole post-Soviet things, like in Georgia, what is still ongoing with Stalin and his perception, because it's like he built the country, and that's the main thing, so that people think that every mean can be justified if you have a bigger goal or something like that. So it is still in the minds of these people, they don't really understand what was happening, and this is really important, and culture could be one of the leading roles in this field to start analyzing all these traumas and start analyzing these narratives that were partly also very much manipulated. Concerning the culture and its role after the war, okay, if even the war stops tomorrow, there is so much to rebuild at the moment that I think one of the biggest means for that could be the culture, because with the war stopping or finishing, there will be so many different things coming up in the minds of the people, and this can be really, it will get very dangerous, and it will bring to the surface a lot of very negative stuff. So I think the culture can be used as one of the means somehow to glue the societies back together and somehow to help them analyze the whole situation. Because, for example, my organization is working since 2012 with a Swiss foundation. It is called Artas Foundation, and they work in the war-affected areas. So we work a lot in Zaldubo, which is one of the regions with a lot of internally displaced people from Abkhazia. Despite the fact that it is impossible to bring these people into the dialogue with the ones who stayed on the Abkhazian side, it is still very important for them to digest what really happened and to come out from this black and white situation where they were really thrown out from their own houses. But it is also interesting to understand why did this happen actually, and no one is trying to analyze that. So I think this is in order to heal the society and to bring this moment of healing all these traumas which are there since so many years, and they will still be there in Ukraine for sure. I think art and culture should kind of rethink its role, because what, for example, we see now in Georgia is that artists and cultural workers, they're kind of trying to substitute everything that the state is not able to face, and somehow is not able to suggest any solution. So these people are really trying to take over the role of the social worker. So who thinks about the art like art anymore? So it's really very controversial issue.
It's the same for us here. But I think we're very comfortable here, just discussing among ourselves, and would like to have you not as spectators, but also as participants. So I would like to invite you either to address questions, or to raise points, or to comment, or to react angrily, or to say that you disagree strongly with something that it was said here on this improvised stage. Yes.
I want to reflect, thank you very much for the moderating the event, but I want to specifically reflect on what Tatiana said and how you commented on that as provocative. To me it's very problematic when the truth that is not defined in trendy words is being commented as provocative or in such ways, because that's what the reality is. And I think that artists and cultural workers, no matter where they are, have to take the responsibility and stop pretending that art can be, let's say, independent or free from political developments and political responsibility. But here the danger is that we might fall into the trap of cancelling culture and cancelling everyone. And I mean, cancelling is not fine, but not, for example, taking applications from certain participants because of their views is okay to me. So what I want to say is that I fully agree with what Tatiana said, is that culture and also the countries that are economically, let's say, rich, or they have more resources to support it for a long time before we ended up with the words. And it has to be said, and also artists and cultural practitioners should avoid this, what is it called,
you can say it in a
saying when you sort of don't say things out loud, or you don't
self-censorship.
Self-censorship, yeah, thank you. Self-censorship, which is also very common in countries that went through the war or are still going through the war. And this, well, we keep talking about critical thinking, but that's also about taking responsibility of, as an artist from a certain country, and I think we should be cautious in not putting all the blame and responsibility on the other side, and then we are okay. So what I'm trying to say is that yes, culture has the responsibility, and it is responsible for the wars and also other developments, and it has to be reflected in what cultural practitioners and artists do, and it has to be defined. Also, you are talking about peace, which is very important, but I think the ones who, like warlords, are very good at defining, and peace activists are not. Like, what is peace? What do we mean by that? What we have to do? Yeah, and also, I mean, it affects on artists who try to promote peace as well. So just to summarize, I'm just saying that responsibility has to be taken by cultural practitioners and artists. And when we talk about critical thinking, it also has to reflect on self-critical thinking, and it also cultural practitioners have to find mechanism to avoid self-censorship and cancelling the culture. That's what I wanted to say. And
I'm in this strange position that I agree fully with you. And I don't think you, in a way, like, let's agree first that we're speaking in foreign languages. Nobody of us is speaking in their maternal language. So there is a lot of things that go into words. It's just like, sometimes it's convenient. When I said provocative, it's what I meant is like really a very fertile affirmation from which, like, you can do these exercises that you were saying, and I fully agree with you. We should really use our critical thinking abilities and should interrogate everything, even peace. Yes, I used, like, I defined in the beginning culture, saying that we'll avoid the essentialist kind of definitions of it. The same with crisis and the same with peace. And I'm fully aware that a part of the discourse of peace has been co-opted and it's being used by warlords. And of course we should interrogate what peace is, for whom is peace. Like, we don't want an unjust peace. That should be clear. In a way, it's like how this peace is built really will have a significance in terms of how long it will last, how equal it will be, how just, and how long-lasting it will be. So in this sense, and then when I said that I agree with Tatiana on that affirmation, I'm not saying that only culture is to blame, but I'm using that sentence as also interrogating, yes, Putin is to blame. Yes, there are parts of the official Russian culture that are to blame for the spread of this militaristic language and culture. But also we should interrogate on a deeper level, because like my textbooks about medieval rulers are not going into war, but I think they're contributing towards some normalizations that I find very problematic. Like my textbooks, some of my literary books are, for example, justifying gender violence, and I think we should interrogate that. Some of them are very problematic, describing some ethnic groups, for example, and that also should be problematic. So we should be aware of it. It's not equal, of course. It doesn't mean we put on the same balance, but it's also problematic, and we should address it. So I don't know if I needed this self-explanation in a way, but I wanted to clarify.
So. Yeah, just briefly reflect. I think I got pretty sensitive to the word, just because nothing personal. It's just that I'm seeing this tendency of going for this word, and I'm saying just in general. Like I remember I was in this conference in Georgia on peace dialogue, and that was more for Armenians, Georgians, and Azerbaijanis. And there was this American expert and saying, peace is boring and justice is not. And I see this tendency of putting very deep and problematic issues in the words as if that's, some sort of advertisement rather than very problematic issue. And even if we talk about colonialism, if we talk about war, those are very complex issues. You cannot talk about them as you do about Coca-Cola. You have to go deep.
They're part of the story.
Yeah, you have to go deep. And I expect this from artists and cultural practitioners as well, rather than doing it the way, advertisers or populist politicians do.
Short remark about just this culture, which is guilty. Yes, it is guilty not in terms of only role models and heroes as they promote, but from more deep and more complicated issues. For example, in post-truth world, we and populations of our countries are intended to believe more those who we know. Yes, and when there are narratives that describing existence of great Russian culture and nothing about Ukraine, nothing else, Russians are those they know, that is why believe. And it's all of this aggression because they hope to be understood in this regard. So more complex issues. When we are unknown, it means that we are strangers. And it is possible to let them this aggression. And this is why it's more complicated issues as well.
Anna had a question.
Yeah.
I think I have an unpopular opinion, maybe. But I just wanted to mention that I also hope for the future, a future in which I imagine for myself art existing, in a way in which your personal experience of a human being being in this world can be expressed as art, in art, and art has space for it without it being explicitly political necessary. Because what sort of makes me afraid is that if we put all this responsibility to each artist, or that art needs to necessarily be all of this, then somehow we exclude the fact that art can also just be a place where people find meaning in their life. So, yeah, just that.
This is why we didn't go for any essentialist concept of culture or of art.
In our situation, we are talking a lot about neutrality is the way to help the aggressor. And from our perspective, from the nation that's been in the war and being destroyed, the art which is being presented that is said that it's not political, that it's out of context, can be really easily used against oppressed power. So oppressed side, yeah. So it's really well. I mean, in modern world, it's impossible to produce a good, meaningful art without taking a position.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
And if you're going to do some paintings of landscapes, it's one thing. But if you're doing something more meaningful, then there is no choice.
Paintings with landscapes can be very meaningful. That's maybe what I wanted to say as well.
And also can be very political.
Maybe. By the way, also, when we're talking about peace, but what kind of peace? Yes. It's because sometimes Ukraine is also in war, but their war is just as, and of course we can have peace paid by territories, but somebody added territories with people. Let's think about those people. So sometimes in Belarus knows peace can be not much better than war.
But why do you mix all in what? Different historical periods, different totally persons, different background of activities. The country is a country. The politicians make their job not the best, for the majority of countries. We know and still it's valid, this stereotype of German Nazi, like this. But what happened with the Bessarabian Germans, for example, who was here like ethnic group? Why they was guilty for some crazy Hitler to be expelled, all of them to destroy their villages? I think, unfortunately, today we have almost a similar situation when we make guilty, Russian, Ukrainians, Gagauzans or others, which have nothing to do. The peasant who work with the field and tractor, have peasant because if will be just intellectuality and nobody will do that stupid work like somebody considers, we will not have nothing to eat. And then my advice for any country or society is if you fight with the past, you will not have the future. So the Ukraine is like it is. We cannot change the past. It is the Ukrainian past. It's Soviet Union. It's Russian Empire for a very long time. From the beginning, Ukraine was a part of Russian Empire. Even to, I will say, unpopular maybe words, but the most active part of the Russian imperialism was of Ukrainian origin, settled like Cossacks, and we cannot deny even Kuban Cossacks in Russian Federation have Ukrainian roots, and the colonization of Siberia, if I look for, especially for the Primorsk Krai, Khabarovsk, I was in Chukotka, in Yakutia even, and if you look there, majority Ukrainian origin and Ukrainian surnames, especially from Chernigov, Kiev gubernia, Poltava gubernia. So these peer persons who know.
Did you ask them if they went there voluntarily or they were deported?
They was not, I don't speak about only deported, because this narrative that the whole colonization was deported, it's also,
Let's not talk about the roots of Russian imperialism.
It's about exaggeration, because the first one was the people who was there going by the Russian Empire exploring new territories. There was added deported, was added,
exploring new territories from the point of view of people that were living there, it's also a form of imperialism and colonization. When we say like Europeans discovered America, America was whatever.
French people were also discovering Africa.
It's a totally different when you have almost the same roots population. That Chechens, for example, the Dagestan, the Kabarda, yes, they really was occupied by the Russian Empire by force, but the part of Ukraine or Belarusian, it was from the roots, and it's true when they say that Russians are originally from Ukraine, and this is also a narrative, the Kiev and the Slavic people moved to the east, not the rebels, not the Russians, coming to the west. The movement was to the east, so it's very complicated when we mix all this stuff. I know the Western people, they don't care and they don't know even before where is Ukraine, and I know every village. My grandparents are from Odessa region. I know very well from the Soviet time, from the past, from the today, and it's a big tragedy for all these people here inside the former Soviet Union. Around the ocean, it's a different perspective, but here it's a big tragedy which will have an impact. And fighting with culture, fighting with music, fighting with sports, and it's not the best solution, I think, because we should separate this from other. The opinion of people in Ukraine is diverse. The opinion of people in Russia is diverse. We cannot make guilty them for passport that they get by the accident that the Soviet Union was disappear, split, and who remains there, they get this passport. It's too much links between these people, Many are even direct relatives and brothers having both sides, and because propaganda, which are antagonists, they are now fighting each other and arguing and like this, but this inside tragedy is a similar like former Yugoslavia, when the same also would take the population, divided also by religion, start to kill each other and fight in this way. So should pay attention to history, to geography, also to understand that Ukraine is a product of Soviet Union. This is a reality because
No, you went in circle.
I can show you any map.
No, you went. Now you've done a full circle. You started by not like past in a way you should not fight with the past, and in a way as if it's there. And then you're saying that the past influences everything.
No, I don't choose. I know very well because I was a scientist and I know I can give you every argument, which you even don't imagine. Why is the
every scientist does that.
Why is the South Bessarabia in Ukraine? Why is the Bukovina in Ukraine? Why is Kherson in Ukraine? Why is Transcarpathia in Ukraine? Yeah, why? Because Soviet Union took these territories and give to. Okay, no pretension. This is this reality. We should just recognize and accept and just to.
Are we still talking about culture? Culture?
So this is the result of culture because these are different regions
not
with
playing
a
culture,
different
so
background
it's
people, with a different history. Because somebody who just become a part of Soviet Ukraine in 45 or 46 is not the same with who was in Ukraine, from the very long time, or who was in the West Ukraine, which was different background, cultural background. It's not a question who is good, who is bad, who is have good heroes or bad heroes. Just a question of diversity in this situation, and to accept finally this diversity and different background of these people, of countries.
So did Russia accept the diversity of Ukraine?
I am not advocate of Russia. The question is about Ukraine.
Answer my question.
The Russia have also imperialistic narrative, which vice versa want to say that they have exclusive right, on the Ukrainian history, on the Ukrainian geography, and like this, which also, of course, is not true. And Russia also should look for their past and to understand that it's a creation of the also territories which are totally different, and many of them even not linked with any history of Slavic or Russian people. Some of them very recent.
What you're saying,
it's the same problem for Russia.
What you're saying is from the point of view of states, and I have really travels with artists speaking as like artists of states. Like, let's imagine that art also can go beyond borders and taking official narratives and going beyond them, like beyond the Russian narrative, because in the end, this world has been divided into countries very recently, and now like essentializing.
Should separate also, because some people look for each other to find the point, and let's let them to make some points of unfortunately politicians' fault to do this, Also not only politicians, but other.
But we will say that art
like
should build bridges. I don't know where you got the point that we're saying something different.
Yeah, the culture and art should unite and should not be prohibitions. Should not be like narratives.
Can you also, sorry, like dialogue means exchanging points of view.
Just also clarify, if we're talking about the fault of culture at the moment, I talk about modern culture. I don't talk about Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, it was long ago. It was Kipling long ago, also imperialistic poet, yes. But we not make him guilty for yes, recent developments. Just recent things. Russian literature, the Russian science fiction of the last 20 years. And how it describes reality and what are those heroes. Mass popular literature. Film like Brat 2, yes. Such things, we're talking about recent such things which later came into propaganda. They are guilty, not Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and Pushkin. Let's let them
Rest in peace.
Yes, peace and don't remember. These people are alive. Look, Yayenko is alive. He is guilty.
Prilepin is alive.
Prilepin is alive and he is guilty, yes. Because what they are doing is even not wrong, like from our point of view, wrong models of violence, not only those, but those people who doubt and changed and destroy any ethical and moral orientations and prepare your brain to be governed by anybody. Yes, it means that if you have nothing about what is good, what is bad at all, and everything is relative, yes, and it's changing black and white, they prepare the brains of people, then go as soldiers to Ukraine and so other people. They are guilty, not those who.
I think I can connect it to some discussions in political philosophy, that like culture, but in the sense, like Gramsci was using it, power doesn't govern just by brute force. It also kind of creates a consensus, and we should really look into this process, like how the consensus, how the so-called cultural hegemony of an idea, how the so-called common sense is being built, what is acceptable, what not, how other people are being described, and culture is a big part of that. And I think we can agree all that nobody says that only culture is to blame, but maybe we could agree that we should interrogate culture as one of, it depends on many constellations, but culture also has, in a way, a very important role to play. And unfortunately, it's being instrumentalized. Unfortunately, it's being weaponized. Unfortunately, it's being and has been used in order to conquer and subjugate people. And I can give other examples, like from philosophy of religion. There is like British imperial officers going to Africa and describing peoples there lacking religion. And if they're lacking religion, they lack reason, they're not human beings. So the territory is empty, they can be occupied. And then after this kind of colonizers, you have the army going there. What is the culture there? Like, it has really, in a way, it provides the motivation. It provides the picture of the world in which the army intervenes. Like, the army is justified because it's an empty territory. It doesn't matter. So in a way, in many ways, we should really take,
like so-called civilized, which people should.
Yeah, like, and culture is a very important player here. It doesn't mean that we as precarious cultural workers have to blame ourselves for that. We have to probably do some self-interrogations, but we agree it's a thing that we should look at it and not take for granted, and not take for granted state narratives. I'm an anarchist internationalist. I don't care about national borders. I understand them. I empathize with people that like, and I love my community. I'm looking as an anarchist for a way to say I love my community without being nationalist and without being exclusivist and saying like I love only this community and the rest of them are somehow worse or not.
But you want to control some services.
We're kind of
Yeah, you said that. First you said maybe the state should control some key services.
State is a different thing. State is just the collective agreement, that the collective actor that provides services because I cannot build roads. I have a very instrumental view of the state, and I'm not essentializing it. So do we agree that, are there any questions? Because we here in this organization, in these settings, we never end on time. If we say like 1 hour and a half, it would be 2 hours and over. Do we agree to put a stop here? Or should we take a break and continue then the discussion and attempt to solve everything, because there were many interesting questions raised, and I think we should not leave without a resolution, at least on one of them.
Yeah, I think there are some placinte left also, and the discussion can be continued in informal, in placinte mode and wide mode, and then to let people also take care of themselves.
Maybe I would just intervene shortly. I think who to blame is an important question, because if we look on the history of independent culture, sorry, Rusanda, will not.
Let's blame the culture.
I think it's really important to see how the independent culture developed in the last 30 years, and to what resources did it have access to blame, let's say, one sector for not doing something or for not being able to counteract some kind of like anticipate the war. So what we speak about is like a state culture which was used and instrumentalized and used against some, like in favor of some ideologies or some powers. That is like it's important to distinguish these two sectors because with the resources we have now we can self-educate. That's basically what we are doing today. We cannot counteract something that is like a machinery working through all the channels and mass media and so on. So I think this is an important point. And then if we speak of our sector, what is our role in times of crisis? I think two questions arise. Like, are we working in a reaction way, like to respond to every fire here and there and to kind of run around and save the world? Or do we actually try to rethink of ourselves, our roles, not to close all the holes, like not to save everything, but rather to think in like proactive way how to anticipate these things to happen. Because what we see is that the cultural community, international cultural community, didn't educate the right politicians to not to allow this to happen. So this is like the consequences of not acting like us in a way, not acting enough, good enough to prevent. So how do we change our work and preventing? For preventing, I think that's a question. I think we still have to think how to. Basically, it's about self-organization, about having resources, and a common agenda, which will not be national agenda, but probably international agenda.
And it's this very recent case with a national library that is taken and given to the church by our government, that they are like really letting the library and all cultural institutions to survive somehow, like really to have super less budgets. And then they will argue that, oh, but nobody is going to that library, and like why we should keep them like that when the church can really make them wonderful places to be. And also that's it's, I think, to underfund culture, it's a state strategy, because it's easier to rule I don't know, a bunch of ships than to rule a country full of intellectual and bright thinking people. And you know, like culture always, I don't know, everybody knows about the importance of the culture, but it always was left ultima. The last one, and this is regarding also the budgets, and this is also to the international partners who have, I don't know how much, like they have 10 million budget, or I don't know, 100 million budget for a country, and then at least 0.5 or 1% should go to the culture, and then 20 to water, 30 to social, and something else. So this is not only specifically in Moldova, but also in other countries the culture is left the last. But it's very important, like really. Yeah.
Maybe also to add that when emphasizes importance of culture, it's not because, I wanted also to say this, not it is only responsibility of culture, but just think how powerful it can be. Yes? And it can be powerful for bad things, but how powerful it can be for good things. If there are just enough empowerment, enough resources, yes, to do this. Because if bad people invest in bad things, let's think how we can invest in another power.
Yeah, and almost all sources or institutions that where you are applying for funds, they are supporting project-based projects, let's say, and thinking. And then no capacity support. So you are 2 people, you have a project, you hire 2 more people, and then you say, sorry guys. And like Arta Az have 7 years, we have 7 years of activity, prodigious activities, and we are 2 women who are working there. This is me and my sister. And then when we have a project, okay, we will have partners there, we will pay them. Oh, sorry, the ministry didn't give us this year money because I am critical towards them. And then I will stay with my sister and think, okay, let's write another project. So there is no sustainability without capacity building and without funds for capacity building. And you will not have a strong society without funds for capacity building.